Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. I took the night shift at Larkspur Memorial because I thought quiet would be good for me, a place to drift between fluorescent hum and the soft beeps of machines, a place to mend without anyone asking what I was mending from. The day staff said the hospital slept after visiting hours, that the corridors went long and stupid and the lights got tired. They did not tell me that certain doors swelled at night like bruises, or that the air in the oldest wing tasted like keys. My badge clipped and my shoes soft as apologies, I learned the hallways in a week. The pediatric murals that peeled like sunburn, the pharmacy hatch with its silver laugh of a slot, the cafeteria with chairs stacked in anxious pyramids. But most of all, the basement, where old charts yellowed in their archival drawers and the air forgot its name. Records was my territory between midnight and 4, a little kingdom of paper ghosts and metal cabinets. The ceiling down there was low enough to make you humble, and if the elevator left you, you had to climb a stairwell whose light flickered as if unsure which day to pretend it was. On my third Friday, I realized the map of the basement did not match the shape of my footsteps. You can think a hallway is simple until you walk it with your head tilted just enough to hear the hum in the wiring, and then it becomes a question someone is asking you over and over. The corridor past archives bent around a boiler room and ended in a T. To the right was maintenance, to the left the old laundry. That's what the map said. Except at 1:17 in the morning I walked left and found, not laundry, but a narrow passage paneled in painted brick, the paint the color of schoolroom chalk and the brick the color of dried tongues. I stopped because the light above me clicked twice without deciding, and because the air dropped 10 degrees as if a thought had just passed. I told myself I had taken a wrong turn. There were 2 turns there, weren't there? My brain insisted it knew this hall. My knees, on the other hand, looked for a step backward. Far down the passage, a door stood where no door had stood earlier that night. It was narrow, off-center, bearing a stenciled letter under old tape, W, something. The rest had torn away, leaving a whisker of adhesive like a healed wound. I kept thinking of something my grandmother said when she lost words. How the mouth remembers the shape of a name before the brain can throw it a rope. This door felt like that. An idea my eyes recognized but my shift training refused to sponsor. I went closer. The concrete floor had a seam in it, not expansion, but something like a healed crack. The door itself wore hospital beige and a dent at shin height, as if patients had discovered how far their bodies could kick when their bodies did not feel like their own. No window, only a pebbled metal knob with paint chips caught in its stipple. Against reason, I tested the knob with the back of my knuckles first, an old habit from a childhood fire safety class. It was cool, almost hungry. Somewhere behind it, a machine sighed without power. I should have returned to my desk, logged the anomaly, called maintenance, shrugged. Larkspur was full of things that were almost but not quite the thing you needed them to be. Instead, I pulled my phone, opened the camera to make a note, and saw that the time read 1:22 a.m., the battery at 70%, the reception a single stubborn bar. In the camera preview, the door looked a shade too tall. I lowered the phone, and the door fit itself back into the room's geometry like a flat apology. I took a breath through my mouth because the air had begun to smell like coins. You can think a lot with your fingers on a doorknob. You can think about a year you decided not to remember. You can think about the absence that built itself into a high shelf in your life where you put all the unlabeled boxes. You can think the word don't and the word please at exactly the same time and feel them cancel each other out. Then you can pull. The hinges whispered in a voice that knew where you'd kept your childhood teeth. Cool air exhaled. I listened for the scuttle of roaches, the mutter of pipes, the human laugh of a leak, and heard only the soft, arrhythmic tick of cooling metal, the kind of sound a ward makes just after someone leaves it. My phone's flashlight lanced a thin path across the threshold. A hallway waited on the other side, unlit, angling slightly downward, the walls paneled in a material that pretended to be wood. There were paper notices thumbtacked askew. Their ink bled until the letters looked like eyelashes after crying. I told myself it was a storage annex. Hospitals grow extra rooms the way old trees grow burls. But the air had that coin smell and an undernote of something antiseptic and wrong, as if someone had tried to clean a memory and left it streaked. I stepped in. Sound changes your shape. The quiet in that hall made my shoulders narrower and my feet try to land on the soft part of themselves. A sign overhead, its letters bruised by age, offered a direction. War. Again, the letters dissolved, as if the sign had been ashamed of its own word. Down the slant of floor, a set of double doors waited with their push plates tarnished to a color you could taste. In the seam between them, a blackness coiled, as regular as rope. The flashlight insisted the doors led to an empty ward. My lungs insisted I was being counted. At the threshold to the double doors, my phone blinked. The screen froze. The flashlight throttled. The camera app shook loose of itself and snapped a picture unasked. The shutter sound tried to be cheerful and failed. The image was black with a smear of bright gray like emotion taken the wrong way. When the light returned, I saw that the push plates bore faint palm prints, too many, layered, and that the right-hand door had a polite print at the height of a child's hand, the fingers long as a pianist's, what they call spider hands, except the hand had 6 fingers. My first thought was history. An old pediatric ward, an annex closed since renovations, the residue of a form of life sanctioned by fluorescent light. We inherit rooms the way we inherit weather. But the map had not shown this, and the child's palm print was clean, as if from this evening. I put my back into the right door plate, half hoping the doors would not move. They gave with a grim little cough. Inside, rows of beds with their mattresses stripped bare, each bed angled just a degree off alignment, which is the degree that makes you feel mad. Curtains sagged between them in their rails, blue-green, as if the ocean had once been convinced to stand still here. On some of the beds lay folded blankets whose corners made knife points. On others, shapes underneath, not bodies, but things the shape of resting. I did not go farther than 3 steps. The floor had that buffed and then forgotten gloss like an airport at 4 in the morning. The coin smell had receded, replaced by something low and earthy, not rot, but dry, if dust could make a smell of drought. Near me, a bedside table wore a stack of charts, the topmost with a date stamp reading 1998, then 1989, then 1956 as I shuffled through. Not sequential, not chronological, as if time had been shuffled by a hand that did not care which game we were playing. At 1:34 a.m., something breathed in the vent, not air, not mechanical push, but the insinuating soft of breath held too long and finally let go. I set the charts down, one sheet slipping to the floor like an old admission. The paper showed a symbol where a name should be, a circle full of diagonal lines, then a series of small dashes that could have been a stutter in pen form. Nurses signaled initials in this hospital. These were not initials. I put the page back on top and felt the weight of my own attention lean forward. Down the row, a curtain trembled, not a full sway, not the casual sigh of air, a tremble like a muscle trying to relearn itself. In the gap between curtains, I saw a bed occupied by that which was not sleeping. The shape was bundled the way our training taught us not to bundle, tight as if the blanket were being used to remember a body's edges. I told myself to say out loud that I was staff, that I was here to help, that this ward was closed, that whoever was here had strayed into an unsafe place. I found my mouth was busy not making the sound an animal makes before it flees. A second tremor. The curtain rings whispered along their track by one, then one more, then paused like a heartbeat that remembered a song. The bundle on the bed sank and lifted with a patient breath that did not collect air. The room had too many corners. I stepped back and my shoe struck the seam between tiles. Under a bed 3 down, someone's shoes sat facing out from the wall, their laces tied in neat loops, waiting the way a ritual waits for an appropriate throat. The coin smell returned, laid a ribbon across the room, and the vent sighed again, this time with a small, despondent whistle as if a kettle were trying to grieve. The curtain on the far bed, the one with the 6-fingered print on its plate nearby, pulled halfway and stopped. I found myself counting to 5 the way I counted when thunder was trying to decide whether to be my friend. At 3, a shape past the curtain sat up. No face at first. A head turning, a shoulder restarting, a neck creaking like a page turned too slowly. Then, the glint of an eye that seemed not to be in the right place, not high enough, not centered, as if the face had unlearned where to look. I told myself it was a doll, some training mannequin left and slummed into personhood by my nerves. It adjusted the bundle around its lap with patient, fussy hands, the kind that fold laundry the same way, dead or alive. The fingers were too many, 6 on the right, 6 on the left, though one on the left tapered to a blind nail. "Ma'am," I said before I could invent a different word. "Sir." My voice picked a corridor and walked down it without my permission. "You can't be here." It turned toward the sound of my voice, not its source. The not right eye found me the way a sound finds an ear that wasn't expecting to work. It smiled with closed lips, and I could see it trying to remember how much of a smile to show a stranger. Then it took something from the bundle, a badge on a lanyard, decades old. The laminate blistered, the name bubbled beyond reading. It slipped the lanyard over its head with the same patient fussiness, and then patted the badge against its chest the way you reassure a heart. A moth struck the ceiling light. The little thud of it carried like a knock in a narrow house. "This ward is closed," I said, "because repetition can be a spell if you use it with mercy. What do you need?" The figure tilted its not right face, listened to the question as if through water, then placed one hand flat on the bed and swung its legs to the floor. Its feet found the shoes under the neighboring bed without glancing, slid into them as if they had been waiting for that weight to return. The laces, tied already, tightened on their own with the careful logic of a palm pushing them down. It stood, and for a moment the curtains were all polite about the space they would now need to provide. It took a step toward me. The lights above hiccuped. I saw then that it did not cast a shadow, not because it did not deserve one, but because the shadows in this ward had unionized and chosen to be elsewhere while this labor was performed. "Let me escort you upstairs," I said, because my training required it and because my body had discovered the grip of syllables. "We can find your—" I almost said room, but the room was here and had been and would be. I almost said chart, but the chart had made a symbol of itself. I settled on place. It smiled again, or not the same smile, something like a dark taut smile seen through a gauze of habit. Then from the vent, a voice that was not a voice said, at 1:47 in the morning, the word Warren. It wasn't spoken. It found me. War, Ren, each syllable a stone dropped into a tin bucket. The figure with the too many fingers did not react, or it did, but with a pause so slight it could have been a crease returning itself to a sheet. I looked back toward the double doors. A second door had appeared parallel to them, narrow, unmarked, a fire door's cousin. When I faced it, the coin smell strengthened, not unpleasant now, more like the presence of certainty. The figure looked at the new door without looking. We stood the way people stand at crosswalks at 2 a.m., waiting not for permission, but for a car that may have forgotten to be a car. Then the overhead lights went calm. The figure's hands, busy since waking, stilled. I heard, from somewhere below the floor, a sound like pages being turned by a bare foot. The new door's bar latch clicked in, then out, then in, a polite testing. This was when I considered leaving. Not fleeing because my legs still belonged to me, but withdrawing in the performance of duty, as if to fetch a supervisor no one would wake. I turned half a step and my phone buzzed, an alert from the front desk, a call light on 4 North. In the same instant, the basement clock chimed 2 in the morning with a sound like someone tapping a cooling pan. Duty can be a rope that ties you to exactly the thing you should not lift. I told the figure, "Wait here," as if waiting had ever not been the point, and stepped toward the unmarked door because it had the dignity of a question clearly asked. The bar was smooth with the oil of hands I would not have guessed had been here. I pushed. The stairwell beyond angled down farther than a basement had any right to go. You can feel elevation with your knees. Mine argued gravity with the stubbornness of children. The walls were that painted brick again, the paint brushed in strokes that wanted to be careful, that failed in the corners where the brush had found a place to rest. The steps were metal, grated, their pattern of holes like tidy mouths refusing to admit a story. The light came from nowhere and everywhere, a trouser pocket light, the weak glow of an appliance asleep but listening. Behind me, the figure waited. I knew because the air on the back of my neck did not cool. At 2:12 a.m., the stairwell turned. On the landing, a framed evacuation plan had been mounted, its case screwed shut with the stubbornness of liability. The plan showed a rectangle of halls with rooms labeled Warren C. 3 exits marked in green. A red dot showing, "You are here," placed at the top, too near the edge of the paper, as if the plan itself wanted to be free of me. I reached to wipe a smear across the plastic and saw my reflection. The plastic did not reflect me. It reflected a hallway with different paint and a different clock and doors with brass knobs, and beyond one of those doors I almost saw, before the plastic fogged at the heat of my breath, someone's bent head, the angle of a person reading something they were afraid to read. The figure had come to stand beside me without making a sound the ear could count. It reached with its 6 and 6 hands and tapped the plastic twice with a fingertip the shape of a thin spoon. The taps made no sound. Then it pointed down the stairs as if it remembered a name it wanted me to say first. "Warren," I said, because words can be levers if you put them under your tongue and press. The stairwell took that word like a coin and kept it. We descended. The air thickened in that specific way old hospitals keep for secrets. It felt like cool bread. On the next landing, a door opened toward us a fraction, enough to make a pressure change you could taste. Beyond it, a corridor with terrazzo floors and bulletin boards lined in faded felt. A poster curled at its edges. "Hand hygiene saves lives," the little cartoon hands pale as peeled grapes. A second poster, "Visitation." Suspended until further notice, dated with a year of panics. A third poster that bore no text, only the circle full of diagonal lines I had seen on the chart upstairs, as if someone had hung up the idea of a sign to see who would notice. We entered. The lights here worked too well, steady, unblinking, the kind of light that punishes dust. The doors on either side had little windows with wire in their glass. Some were painted shut. Behind one, a room full of stacked chairs kept their shadows piled like folded coats. Behind another, an exam table bore a dent the width of a back and a length of time. My phone's signal vanished altogether and the battery percentage slid to 64 in a way that felt personal. Halfway down the corridor, another of those narrow, unmarked doors stood ajar. At its base, something had been pushed to stop it closing. A small rubber wedge shaped like a toe. The figure paused there. It reached down and picked up the wedge with its left hand and held it like an idea. With its right, it smoothed the edge of the door where the paint had been chipped. I saw then that its hands were not extra-fingered so much as over-articulated, as if each finger had been asked to learn a second language and had added a joint to accommodate the extra verbs. "Who are you?" I asked, softly, which is the same volume the soul uses for please. It looked at me, then past me, then through me like someone making sure the line behind you is moving. It turned the wedge over and pressed it back under the door. The door tried, politely, to complete its thought. The wedge did its work. At 2:28 in the morning, we reached the end of that corridor and stood before a door marked with a proper plaque, brushed steel, the letters engraved rather than printed, Warren C. A line beneath it, psychiatric observation, admin use only. The plaque had been polished recently by a cloth that had not been clean. The handle below it was the kind you must pull with your full hand, not a panic bar, but an invitation to a grip. My fingers went cold up to the fourth knuckle. We stood there a long moment, the figure's head tilted in increments you could nearly hear. I had the sense that whoever it had been had spent most of their life listening to doors like this, and only sometimes opening them. Then, from the far side, the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping once across the floor, then stopping as if it remembered it had promised to be furniture. I could not say later why I knocked. I lifted my hand and placed the back of it against the door once, twice, 3 times, so softly that what I really did was teach the door my pulse. The door opened as if pulled by a hand that had never learned doubt. Inside, a room bigger than its blueprint would allow, a rectangle stretched into something nearly a hall, lit by lamps that placed their light in quiet cones. Along the right wall, observation windows peered into rooms with single beds and no objects that could be tied into loops. Along the left, a counter ran with old computers asleep like animals in winter. At the far end, a desk with a chair turned away, as if the person who had sat there preferred to face the wall. I touched 2 fingers to the inside of my elbow to steady myself. The figure moved past me without hurry, past the observation panes, paused at the 4th, and placed its palm to the glass. The room beyond the glass had been swept bare. In the mirror of that empty, I saw us. Me thin as the thought of myself, it blurred into geometry that made my eyes try to look another way. Then, in the reflection, the door behind us closed, though I had not moved and the handle on our side shifted. A small, respectful tightening, the kind of click a lock makes when it doesn't want to be blamed. The chair at the desk turned. No one sat there. The chair turned anyway, as if a polite teammate had decided the meeting should begin. A rustle under the counter followed, like paper sliding a short distance. I rounded the counter and found a ledger, an actual ledger bound in gray buckram, filled with handwritten entries in a narrow, controlled script that made even the letter S stand to attention. At the top of the first open page, a date, August 14th, 1998. Beneath it, names. Then that symbol again in the column that should have read disposition. The far column, time of discharge, listed times that all ended with the same minute, regardless of hour, 43. I checked 3 pages, every release with 43, 243, 543, 1143. I thought of the vent speaking at 247, of the little whistle of the kettle grief, of the basement clock's tin. I looked at my phone. 2:37 a.m. The figure beside me turned its head toward the far end of the room, where an exit sign promised a door. Under the sign, the wall had been painted and repainted until it had the texture of regret. The figure began to walk. I followed, not because following felt safe, but because being the second person in a corridor can feel like you might be the one to know what the corridor wants. We reached the end wall. The exit sign hummed the way sodium lights hum when they marry loneliness. The figure raised its right hand and, without touching the wall, made a motion as if wiping a window with a cloth. The paint lifted, not flaked, not peeled, lifted like cellophane. Underneath, a different color, darker, the color of a bruise that remembers. In that darker paint, the faint outline of a door, not framed, not hinged, just the place where a door had once been, now covered over to reassure. A small, impossible current of cooler air issued from where no seam should exist. In that passage of air was the smell of rain that had fallen in a year I had not known. The figure stepped back 1 pace exactly. It looked to me with that not right eye and then past me with the other. It waited the way a turning waits for a hand. I put my palm to the painted wall. It felt warmer than the air, the way an old phone feels after you have spoken your whole lunch break into it. I pushed where the outline suggested. The wall flexed like muscle with no blood. Then the outline yielded, and the covered door opened in a motion that did not disturb the paint. Darkness, like a folded hallway, let itself be noticed. At 2:43 a.m. sharp, somewhere in the hospital above us, a monitor alarm that I had silenced 10 minutes earlier sounded again, as if it too had found this minute irresistible. The figure's hands hung still. We listened to the exactness of that time pass. You could hear it step off the curb and cross the street. Inside the uncovered door, the narrow room went 10 paces and then made a left it hoped you would miss. On its walls, hooks. On the hooks, nothing except the suggestion that once cloth had hung here and turned into ghosts politely. My flashlight did its thin duty. The beam met the far wall and died as if embarrassed. I took one step, then two. On the third step, the door behind me tried to close and met the figure's patient, over-articulated hand, which put 2 fingers into the seam and held a small argument with the wall. The door waited, and in waiting discovered it had always wanted to be obedient. The left turn opened into a space that was wrong in scale. I had been underground long enough to expect low ceilings, wires like old veins, sump pumps muttering. Instead, the ceiling soared to a height only rich buildings and churches desire, and above me somewhere a light, not hospital white, not daylight, but something like candle made of river glass, cast a damp glow. In that space stood row after row of metal shelving. On the shelves, jars. Not glass jars, not specimen jars. Different, matte, heavy, rough as ceramic, each with a lid sealed in what looked like wax. On each jar, a label, not typed, not printed, but inked in a hand that might have belonged to the ledger. A name, then a year, then that symbol, the circle with the diagonal hatching. I stepped closer to read the nearest, Danielle Cole, 1956. The next, M. Roth, 1989. The next, records, no first name. The next, staff. Beneath the names, the years did not mean birth or death. They meant the year the jar had been placed on the shelf. I knew this in the place your teeth know weather. The symbol beneath the year looked almost like the top view of a well. "What is this?" I said, not to the figure, not to myself, but to the air that had arranged this museum. The air answered by doing nothing, a fraction of a fraction longer than air is permitted. The figure moved among the shelves with the ease of a person moving between pews in a church they had once attended every Sunday. It did not touch the jars. It paused at one labeled K. Triever, 2018, then at another labeled Burn Unit, 1972, then at another that had no name at all, only the year 1931, and a line drawn under it so firm the pen had scored the label. It stood before that one for a count of 6. Then it turned to me as if to say, "Do you see how the years do not improve the shape of this?" Something rustled at floor height, a thing with little feet deciding whether the aisle belonged to it or to me. The flashlight stuttered as if embarrassed again, and then from far down the rows a sound like a lid settling, then another, then a third, as though in rooms beyond this one someone had put away their hunger. I did not touch any jar. I had the feeling that touching one would make it decide I owed it an explanation, and that explanations could be bribes in a place like this. Instead, I read labels as if they could be prayers. At the end of the second row, a jar sat with its lid misaligned, not enough to open, just enough to have an opinion about opening. Its label read, L. Abrams, 2003, and beneath the year the circle symbol had been crossed through with a second diagonal line, making a close-knit net. The wax seal around the lid bore a fingerprint in its soft that had never been smoothed. "Please," I said, to no one in the general hope that please would consider pluralizing itself. The figure beside me now and patient reached with its left hand and put its palm over the lid without touching. The room made a sound then, a sound like the inside of a coat pocket when you turn it out, a sigh that had lint and absence and the little secret coins of older selves. The misaligned lid settled. The fingerprint in the wax did not. I thought of the ledger and its 43s. I thought of the evacuation map and its dear false dot. I thought of my own badge with my name on it, intact and unblurred, and of the year I had not told anyone about, the one that lived behind my ribs like a stairwell you pretend is not there. I cleared my throat because I needed to make a human noise. "How many?" I asked, though the answer was as countable as the shelving. The figure did not answer. It turned its head, listening. From the doorway, behind us, a light-footed approach, neither hurried nor reluctant. Someone else had found the uncovered door, or had decided they would this time. At 2:56 in the morning, a second figure appeared at the turn. This one walked wrong in a way that resolved, with a kind of tenderness, into familiarity. A nurse's walk from 40 years ago, when the shoes were heavier and the floors stricter and the charts actual weight. She wore a uniform that had forgotten its color and a hairnet that had remembered every head it had been asked to cage. Her face was soft and incorrect in the manner of an old photograph, features shifted slightly to accommodate the hunger of time. She did not look at me. She looked at the jars and put her hands together the way people do when they are not praying. "What is kept?" she said, and the voice did not come from her mouth so much as from the decision the room made to speak. "What is kept returns." The first figure inclined its head toward her, an acknowledgement without friendship. The nurse moved down the row, counting silently, touching no surface with any part of herself. At the L. Abrams jar, she paused, as if remembering the shape of someone's laugh, then continued. At the jar labeled staff, she stopped and did not move again for a number of seconds that made my palms damp. "Warren C. is closed," I managed, and hated myself for the bureaucracy in it. "You can't be down here. None of you can." She lifted one hand, a single finger raised like a wick. Not to hush me, to show me it was not her idea to be here. Then she lowered the hand with the sadness of someone returning a key. From the threshold, the uncovered door sighed. The binding paint flexed. The hallway beyond the shelves adjusted, the way a throat adjusts to a word it had not been trained to pronounce. The first figure looked at me and then looked away. A kindness. The nurse's head bent as if in gratitude for what she would not accept. I felt an urgency then that had no object. The kind you feel when a train closes its doors and the person you love is on it and you are not. "Tell me," I said to them both, to the shelves, to the jars, to the ledger humming its thin idea of time beyond the wall. "What is this for?" The nurse's mouth moved. She did not shape a word I could borrow. The first figure lifted its too many fingers and held them up as a display. Left hand, 6, right hand, 6. Together, 12. Then it drew one finger down as if to remove it, then another, until only one remained, left or right I could not tell. It closed that last finger into a fist and brought it to its chest where the old badge hung. 1. The badge. The chest. The year, maybe, collapsed to a point. I do not know why I knew the next part. I reached into my scrub pocket and found the folded scrap of paper I kept there. A nothing, a superstition, a discharge note from a patient upstairs who liked to copy poems into the margins of forms and had given me the sheet the day he left, saying, "You want a thing you can unfold when rooms get loud." The lines were almost worn off from my touches. I unfolded the scrap and placed it on the shelf beside a jar with no name. The room hummed once, like a fridge acknowledging power. The nurse nodded, almost. The first figure lifted its hand one more time and without touching, pressed its palm against the air over the paper. The ink darkened, the way words do when they decide to stay. 3 floors above, at 3:17 in the morning, a bed alarm chimed. In the ER, someone croaked their mother's name. In a window on 4 North, a visitor dozed upright, the shape of worry still set in their shoulders. Down here, time put its hands behind its back and waited for me to choose a direction. I folded the scrap again and put it back into my pocket. The uncovered door sighed one last time, the sound of paint, deciding to be paint again. The nurse turned and walked away, her shoes choosing care over speed. At the corner, she paused and spoke in a voice that made the jars vibrate so slightly it could have been the idea of vibration. "If you take nothing," she said, "nothing takes you." Then she went, and the hall accepted her absence like a ceiling accepts a stain. The first figure waited. It had waited, I suspected, for longer than the hospital had remembered it. It stepped past me and touched the wall not with its palm but with its shadowless presence. The shelves receded a fraction, a politeness. Then it began to lead me back toward the uncovered door, as if escorting me at last like staff, like someone who had not earned the right to learn another row tonight. At the threshold, it paused and made the smallest bow I have ever seen, a reduction of height so minimal you would miss it if you had not been taught to bow to grief. We ascended. The stairwell equaled itself again. The evacuation map's plastic reflected only me and the hall I stood in. The ledger on the counter up in Warren C lay open to a fresh page, dated with no month, no day, only a year that had not yet occurred. The exit sign hummed the soft sound of something considering going to sleep and deciding to remain awake one more hour. At 3:41 in the morning, I stood once more in the basement where the first door, beige, dented at shin height, waited with its stippled knob. The figure stood on the ward side. It slipped the old lanyard off its neck and held it out to me through the narrow. The plastic laminate had bubbled beyond reading, but the photo beneath showed a face you could forgive. I did not take the badge. It shook its head once, the most human gesture I had seen it make, and let the lanyard fall. It swung in its own weather and came to rest against the door jamb. Then the figure, patient, stepped back into the blue-green of the sagging curtains and let the double doors close. The unmarked door beside them clicked once, the polite kind of locked. I stood there long enough to decide that the coin smell was only in the memory that had now decided to be mine. Then I turned, walked past the boiler room, and returned to archives. On my desk, a stack of charts I had left in disarray sat sorted and corrected, a small rubber wedge placed neatly upon them like a paperweight. Next to the wedge, my phone, the battery now at 60%, the time reading 3:57 a.m. The last photo in my camera roll a smear of bright gray-shaped uncannily like a hand closing. When I clocked out at 6:15 in the morning, the sun looked like a new coin no one had spent yet. I drove home along the river and did not turn on the radio. Birds said their small daily amens to the utility lines. I thought I would sleep and the ward would be a dream, a long, tidy dream with shelves and jars and the polite insistence of a ledger. I would learn later that the shelves do not require sleep the way we do. They prefer a state between, a corridor where rooms hang not from hooks but from names. I returned the following night with a plan, if plan is the word for deciding to carry a single object you do not intend to give away. In my pocket was a key that had never opened any door I owned. It was a spare from an apartment I had left in a year I do not tell anyone about, a key that fit no locks except the ones named Maybe. I had the sense that Warren would appreciate such a key, that the shelves would understand the weight of a metal that had memorized a home. I told myself I would put it where something unnamed could find it, and the unnamed would have one less reason to borrow a person for shape. At 1:06 a.m., the elevator to the basement arrived with the calm of an old animal. I stepped in, pressed B, and watched the numbers do their square little duties. The doors opened, the hum rose, and the corridor to archives received me the way a tongue receives a word it has been waiting for. The beige door waited where I had left it. I stood at it without touching the knob. On its paint, at the height of a child's hand, I saw the smear of 6 fingers, fresh, as if someone had tested whether paint could still register presence. The 6 fingers' mark tapered to a blind nail. I stepped closer. On the floor, against the baseboard, lay my folded discharge note, the lines of ink dark as if newly written, though I had carried it with me all day. I stooped, lifted the paper, felt a weight that could not be paper. When I unfolded it, I found that it was no longer the poem the patient had copied, but a page torn from the ledger, dated with tonight's date and a time that had not yet arrived, and beneath the time, the circle full of diagonal lines, and beneath the circle a single word written in that narrow, faithful hand: return. I folded the page again and put it back in my pocket with the spare key that had never opened anything of mine. When I stood, the door's knob moved a fraction without being touched, a motion like a person turning over in sleep. I told the corridor and the ward and the place beneath them, "I'll keep nothing." I said it in the plain voice of someone telling a password to themselves. Then I took my hands off everything and waited to see if the hospital would let me keep that promise. And down the hall, in the square-lit mouth of the stairwell, something listened as if my words made of air could be saved in a jar and labeled for a year no one had reached yet. The page in my pocket whispered against the spare key whenever I moved, the way 2 secrets make friction when they try to share the same pocket. I told the basement door I would keep nothing, and the hinge accepted my voice like a coin dropped in a blind man's palm. At 1:59 in the morning, I turned the knob and stepped into the cool that remembers. The ward behind the double doors waited as if it had been paused, not abandoned. Curtains sagged in their rails. The blue-green fabric still smelled faintly of a laundry that had taught water to forget. I crossed to the counter, opened the ledger to tonight's blank year, and laid the spare key on the page where the circle with the diagonal lines had already been drawn for me. Its toothy little profile looked obedient on the paper. I pressed my thumb to the wax ring from someone else's jar and then to the key, making a print that would have embarrassed a detective. At 2:43 a.m. sharp, the hospital above breathed in. The alarm I could not stop from loving chimed its exact minute. The jars below us, though I could not see them, answered in a collective hush like sand settling in a glass. The first figure came through the double doors and stood beside me, badge lanyard curled in its hand, as if it had remembered there were rights for giving things back. The old nurse from the shelves arrived too, shoes patient, hairnet neat, her face made of the wrong century in a way that comforted me. She did not look at me. She looked at the ledger, then at the key. "Return," I said quietly, because the room had been designed to punish loudness. "Take it, and take the taking with it." The figure lifted both hands and rested its long, extra-knuckled fingers over the key without touching. The ledger's page wrinkled as if steam had risen from it. The wax ring around the drawn symbol softened without heat and settled into a seal across metal and paper both. The nurse closed her eyes. The door at the end of the ward, the narrow one that had never agreed to be marked, clicked once like a lock agreeing to a truce. Something released the breath it had been keeping for a year I would not live to see. "Warren is closed," the nurse said, not to warn me off now, but to grade the closing. "Not buried, closed." The figure put on the lanyard one last time and patted the badge against its chest. And in that gesture I saw every hand that had ever checked a pulse to reassure itself that a person was not leaving. It turned toward the unmarked door. I stood aside. It paused in the threshold as if waiting for a whisper that had missed its ride. Then it stepped through and was gone with the dignity of a candle that chooses what goes out with it. The nurse followed, but at the seam she placed her palm on my sleeve and made a motion as if smoothing a wrinkle, a courtesy I will be grateful for even after the chalk of my bones has blown into the drains. When they passed, the narrow door completed the thought it had started decades ago. The seam in the wall knit itself until my eyes could not remember where to look. Behind the counter, the ledger closed with a weight that was not the weight of paper. The ward exhaled and went truly empty for the first time while I had breath to notice it. In the vent, I heard only air. The coin smell dissolved into hospital. A small rubber wedge lay where the counter met the floor, unnecessary now but left like a placed period. At 3:19 in the morning, I carried the ledger back to the counter and set it upright as if it were a person in a chair who should not be left slumped. I walked the beds and touched the curtains so they would know someone had seen their neatness. I lifted the shoes under the neighboring bed and put them together heel to heel, a little ritual to instruct grief how to stand. When I left, I pulled the double doors until they kissed, and one more half-inch after, the way you close the mouth of someone who has finished speaking. I resigned from Larkspur Memorial the following week, without giving a reason anyone could write down. I took nothing. I left my badge on the desk, the clip open like a jaw that had decided to stop. I moved to a smaller river and an apartment that knows quiet without needing to be taught. On nights when the city forgets what it meant to promise, I sleep. And yet, resolution is not erasure. It is a door that remembers being a door. At 2:43 a.m. sometimes, in the kitchen of my new place, the drawer where I keep nothing useful makes a single polite sound as if a small metal thought had turned itself over to cool its other side. On the back of my closet door, at the height of a child's hand, I have once, only once, found the faint press of 6 fingers, the 6th fading to a blind nail before my eyes, as if what had been kept all those years had learned to sign its absence with good manners. When I pass Larkspur on the highway in the bluest part of morning, the windows are empty as proper teeth. But if the night has been thunder first, and the air tastes like keys again, I will see a lamp on in a basement room that is no longer mapped, a cone of light no brighter than river glass lighting pages for hands that don't cast shadows. I do not stop. I do not need to. Closed is enough. Closed is a kind of keeping. If you are awake near hospitals at 2:43 a.m., walk with your hands empty and your pockets light. If the air tastes like coins, be generous. If you find a spare key that never fit any lock of yours, leave it where you found it. If you hear 3 careful taps from a door you cannot see, do not answer with your knuckles. Answer with a promise. I will keep nothing, and keep it. If you've made it all the way down these corridors with me, make a small mark of your presence where I can find it. Whisper which minute you felt watched. Leave your trace in the logbook below, and tell the next traveler which door you passed without touching. Listen in the dark, walk with the lights off, and tonight lock only the doors that ask nicely. If this tale stayed with you, leave your name in the ledger downstairs, like this, and speak below, so I can tell who walked the ward and who only pressed their ear to the vent. If you're still listening at this hour, you belong to the vault. Join us, so you don't miss what claws free next. If something in these halls reminded you of home, write it down in the comments. Some stories open themselves when called by another story. The next one might answer to your name. We'll meet again soon, if you're willing to be followed back to your door.